The air in Willow Creek Cemetery hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading roses. Ezra Cole, 28, stood at the edge of the crowd, his heart pounding so loud he swore it echoed off the gravestones. They'd told him to stay quiet, to bury his truth deeper than the coffin they just lowered into the ground. His older brother, Nathan, had been clear that morning, his voice low and sharp over the phone. "Ezra, don't make a scene at Dad's funeral. You know how he felt about you. Keep it together, for Mom's sake." Ezra's throat tightened as he adjusted his tie, the navy suit feeling like a straitjacket. He'd spent years hiding who he was to keep the peace, to avoid the sidelong glances from his small-town Vermont family. But today, standing by his father's grave, the weight of that silence felt like betrayal, not just of himself, but of the man he loved. Elliot Harper, 30, stood a few feet away, his curly blonde hair catching the late October light. He wasn't supposed to be here. Ezra had begged him to stay away, to avoid the whispers and judgment. But Elliot, stubborn as ever, had shown up anyway, his gray sweater soft against the stark black of the mourner's attire. Their eyes met across the crowd, and for a moment, the world stilled. Just the two of them, a fragile thread of connection in a sea of grief and secrets. Ezra's mother, Clara, dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, her face a mask of practiced sorrow. She'd always known about Ezra, though she never spoke of it. "It's just not the time," she'd said that morning, her voice trembling as she smoothed his jacket. "Not today." But when was it ever the time? Ezra's father, Richard, had been a pillar of Willow Creek, deacon at the local church, owner of the hardware store, a man whose word was law. And his word on Ezra's lifestyle had been final, unacceptable. As the pastor droned on about eternal rest, Ezra's gaze drifted to the headstone. Richard James Cole, 1955 to 2025. The dates blurred as memories flooded in. His father's clenched jaw when Ezra came out at 18, the years of cold distance, the way Richard would change the subject whenever Ezra mentioned Elliot. Yet here Ezra was honoring a man who'd never honored him. The hypocrisy burned. Elliot stepped closer, his presence a quiet rebellion. "You okay?" he whispered, his breath warm against Ezra's ear. Ezra nodded, though his chest ached. He wanted to reach for Elliot's hand, to feel the anchor of his touch, but Nathan's warning rang in his ears. "Don't make a scene." The mourners began to disperse, their murmurs fading into the rustle of leaves. Clara approached, her eyes flicking nervously between Ezra and Elliot. "Ezra, honey, we're heading to the reception at the church hall," she said, her voice brittle. "You'll come, won't you?" Before he could answer, a stranger's voice cut through the quiet. He should stay. For the truth. All heads turned. A woman, mid-40s, stood near the grave, her auburn hair pulled back in a loose bun. She wore a simple black dress, but her eyes burned with something fierce, unapologetic. Ezra didn't recognize her, yet her gaze locked onto him with unnerving certainty. "Who are you?" Nathan demanded, stepping forward, his broad shoulders tense. The woman didn't flinch. "Someone who knew Richard better than you think?" she said, her voice steady but laced with pain. "And I'm tired of watching people hide for his sake." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara's hand froze on Ezra's arm, her breath catching. Ezra felt Elliot's fingers brush his. A silent promise, but his heart raced. What truth? And why was the stranger, of all people, dragging it into the open? The reception hall smelled of coffee and casseroles, the kind of comfort food meant to soften grief. Ezra sat at a corner table, his untouched plate of macaroni salad growing cold. Elliot was across the room, talking to an elderly neighbor about her garden, his charm a shield against the curious glances. Ezra envied his ease, the way he could navigate any room without crumbling under the weight of judgment. The stranger from the cemetery hadn't followed them to the reception, but her words lingered like a storm cloud. For the truth, what did she know? Ezra's mind spun, piecing together fragments of his father's life. Richard had been a private man, his emotions locked behind a wall of duty and tradition. But there were moments, fleeting, confusing moments, when Ezra had caught his father staring at him, not with anger but with something like regret. He'd always dismissed it as wishful thinking. Nathan approached, his face tight. "You know that woman?" he asked, jerking his head toward the door as if she might appear. "No," Ezra said, his voice low. "Do you?" Nathan shook his head, but his eyes darted away, a telltale sign he was hiding something. "Just keep it low-key, okay?" Mom's barely holding it together. Ezra clenched his jaw. "I'm not the one causing trouble, Nate." "You brought him," Nathan snapped, glancing at Elliot. "You knew how Dad felt. And Dad's gone." Ezra shot back, his voice sharper than he intended. Heads turned, and he lowered it, heat rising in his cheeks. "I'm done pretending for him." Nathan's face softened, just for a moment, before hardening again. "This isn't about you, Ezra. It's about family." "Then why does it feel like I'm the one being erased?" Ezra's voice cracked, and he stood, pushing past Nathan toward the exit. He needed air, needed to escape the suffocating weight of expectation. Outside, the October chill bit at his skin. Elliot followed, his footsteps soft on the gravel. "Ezra, wait." Ezra turned, his eyes stinging. "I can't do this, Elliot. I can't keep hiding who I am, who we are, just to make them comfortable." Elliot stepped closer, his hand finding Ezra's. "You don't have to. Not anymore." His voice was steady, a lifeline. "But you don't have to fight alone, either." Before Ezra could respond, a car pulled up, its headlights cutting through the dusk. The woman from the cemetery stepped out, her expression unreadable. "Ezra Cole?" she called, her voice carrying across the lot. Ezra froze, his hand still in Elliot's. "Who are you?" he asked, echoing Nathan's earlier demand. She walked closer, her boots crunching on the gravel. "My name's Lena Torres. I worked with your father for 20 years. And I have something to tell you. Something he never had the courage to say himself." Ezra's heart thudded. Elliot's grip tightened, grounding him. Whatever Lena was about to say, he knew it would change everything. Lena's words hung in the air, sharp and heavy, like the first crack of thunder before a storm. Ezra's breath caught, his mind racing to make sense of her presence. The parking lot outside the church hall was quiet, save for the distant hum of voices from inside, and the fading light cast long shadows across Lena's face, making her look both fierce and weary. "What do you mean, something he never had the courage to say?" Ezra asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elliot stood beside him, his hands still clasped in Ezra's, a silent reminder that he wasn't alone. Lena hesitated, her eyes scanning the lot as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Can we talk somewhere private? This isn't easy to say in front of everyone." Ezra glanced at Elliot, who nodded slightly, his expression calm but alert. "There's a bench by the old oak, near the back of the church," Ezra said, pointing to a secluded spot where the tree's gnarled branches framed the evening sky. "No one will bother us there." They walked in silence, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound. Ezra's mind churned with questions. Lena had said she worked with his father, but Richard had run the hardware store alone for years, save for the occasional part-time clerk. What could she know that Ezra didn't? And why now, at his father's funeral of all times? The bench was weathered, its paint peeling, but it held the three of them comfortably. Lena sat on one end, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Ezra and Elliot took the other side, their shoulders brushing. The air smelled of pine and damp leaves, a faint reminder of the cemetery they'd left behind. "I met your father in 2005, Lena began, her voice low but steady. "I was a contractor, freelancing for small businesses in Willow Creek. Richard hired me to redesign the store's layout, make it more efficient. We worked together for months, late nights, early mornings. He was different then, less guarded." Ezra frowned. "Different how?" Lena's eyes softened, but there was pain there, too. "He talked about you, Ezra. A lot. You were just a kid then, maybe 10, always tagging along to the store. He'd light up when he mentioned you, your drawings, your questions, the way you try to fix things with a toy hammer." She smiled faintly, but it faded quickly. "But he also talked about his fears, about how he didn't know how to raise you in a world that wasn't always kind." Ezra's chest tightened. He remembered those days at the store, the smell of sawdust and metal, his father's rare laughter when Ezra would mimic his sales pitch to imaginary customers. But those memories felt distant, overshadowed by the years of silence that followed. "He never told me any of this," Ezra said, his voice thick. "After I came out, he barely looked at me." Lena nodded as if she'd expected that. "That's why I'm here. Richard wasn't just your father, Ezra. He was a man carrying his own secrets, ones he buried so deep they ate at him. And I think it's time you knew." Elliot leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "What secrets, Lena? If you're going to drop something like this, you need to be clear." Lena took a deep breath, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress. "Your father wasn't just my client. For a while we were close. Not romantically, but emotionally. He trusted me with things he couldn't tell anyone else. Not even your mother. Things about who he was, deep down." Ezra's pulse quickened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Richard struggled with his own identity," Lena said, her voice barely audible. "He never said the words outright, but he hinted at it. Moments when he'd talk about feeling trapped, about loving someone he wasn't supposed to. A man from years ago, before he married Clara." The world tilted. Ezra's breath hitched, his mind grappling with the impossible. His father, the man who'd called Ezra's sexuality a sin, who'd refused to meet Elliot, who'd built his life on rigid tradition. It didn't make sense. Yet Lena's eyes held no trace of deceit, only a quiet resolve. "Are you saying my father was gay?" Ezra's voice cracked, the word feeling foreign in this context. "I don't know if he'd have used that word," Lena said carefully. "He never fully admitted it, even to himself. But he carried that weight, Ezra. And I think it's why he pushed you away. Not because he hated you, but because you were a mirror he wasn't ready to face." Elliot's hand tightened around Ezra's, grounding him as the revelation sank in. Ezra wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream. All those years of feeling like he'd failed his father, like he was the problem, and now this? It was too much, too fast. "Why didn't he tell me?" Ezra asked, his voice raw. "Why let me think he despised me?" Lena's eyes glistened. "He was ashamed. Not of you, but of himself. He thought he was protecting you by keeping you at arm's length, by trying to make you fit. But he was wrong, Ezra. And I couldn't let you go on thinking you were alone in this." The church hall door swung open, spilling light into the dusk. Nathan stood in the doorway, his silhouette tense. "Ezra, Mom's asking for you. What are you doing out here?" Ezra stood, his legs shaky. "I'll be there in a minute," he called, his voice steadier than he felt. Nathan hesitated, then disappeared back inside. "I need to think," Ezra said, turning to Lena. It changes everything." Lena nodded. "I'll be around if you need to talk. I'm staying at the Willow Inn for a few days." She handed him a card with her number, then stood and walked back to her car, leaving Ezra and Elliot in the quiet. Elliot pulled Ezra into a hug, his arms strong and warm. "You don't have to figure this out tonight," he murmured. "But whatever happens, I'm here." Ezra buried his face in Elliot's shoulder, the weight of Lena's words pressing against him. His father, a man of secrets, had loved him in his own broken way. But what did that mean for Ezra now? And how could he face his family, knowing the truth they'd all buried? The church hall buzzed with polite chatter, but to Ezra, it was a blur of noise and obligation. He stood by the dessert table, a plastic cup of lukewarm coffee in his hand, his mind still reeling from Lena's revelation. His father, Richard Cole, the man who'd built a life on certainty and control, had been hiding his own truth. It felt like a betrayal, but not in the way Ezra had expected. It wasn't anger that burned in his chest, but a deep, aching sadness for a man who'd lived half a life. Elliot hovered nearby, his presence a quiet comfort. He was talking to Mrs. Delaney, a neighbor who'd known Ezra since he was a toddler, her voice bright as she recounted stories of Willow Creek's annual apple festival. Ezra caught Elliot's eye, and the small, reassuring smile he gave was enough to steady Ezra's racing heart. But the weight of Lena's words clung to him, heavy as the fog rolling in over the Vermont hills. Clara approached, her face pale but composed. "Ezra, can you help with the cleanup? People are starting to leave." Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, a nervousness Ezra hadn't noticed before. "Sure, Mom," he said, setting down his cup, but as he followed her to the kitchen, he couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she let on. Had she suspected Richard's secret? Had she spent decades pretending just as Ezra had? In the kitchen, Clara busied herself stacking plates, her movements brisk. "That woman at the cemetery?" she said suddenly, not looking at him. "Who was she?" Ezra hesitated, his hands pausing on a tray of leftover sandwiches. "Her name's Lena Torres. She said she worked with Dad years ago." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't remember her." "She said they were close," Ezra ventured, watching his mother's face. "That Dad told her things about himself." Clara's hands stilled, a plate hovering over the sink. "What kind of things?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a tremor of fear. Ezra's heart pounded. He wanted to tell her everything, to demand answers, but the fragility in her eyes stopped him. "Just that he cared about me, more than he showed." Clara nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "He did, Ezra. He just didn't know how to show it." She turned back to the dishes, her shoulders hunched, and Ezra knew the conversation was over, for now. Back in the hall, the crowd had thinned, leaving only a few stragglers. Nathan was at the door, shaking hands and accepting condolences, his face a mask of duty. Ezra watched him, wondering if Nathan had known about their father's secret. Had Richard confided in his eldest son, the one who'd always followed in his footsteps? The thought twisted in Ezra's gut, a mix of jealousy and betrayal. Elliot appeared at his side, his hand brushing Ezra's arm. "You want to get out of here?" he asked, his voice low. "We can go back to my place, talk this through." Ezra nodded, grateful for the escape. They slipped out the side door, the cool night air a relief after the stifling hall. Elliot's apartment was a short drive away, a cozy loft above a bookstore in downtown Willow Creek. Inside, the space smelled of coffee and old paper, the walls lined with shelves of novels and vinyl records. It was Elliot's sanctuary, and over the past 2 years, it had become Ezra's, too. They sat on the couch, Ezra's head resting on Elliot's shoulder. "I don't know what to do with this," Ezra admitted, his voice raw. "All this time, I thought he hated me. But if what Lena said is true, why didn't he just tell me?" Elliot ran a hand through Ezra's hair, his touch gentle. "Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he was too scared or too ashamed. But that's his burden, Ezra, not yours." Ezra closed his eyes, letting Elliot's words sink in. "I want to talk to Lena again. I need to know more." "Then we'll find her," Elliot said simply. "Tomorrow. Tonight you need to rest." But rest was impossible. Ezra lay awake that night, Elliot's steady breathing beside him, his mind replaying every moment with his father. The arguments, the silences, the rare moments of connection. He thought of the time Richard had caught him sketching at the store, a portrait of a boy from school Ezra had secretly crushed on. Richard had stared at the drawing, his face unreadable, then handed it back without a word. Had that been shame or something else? The next morning, Ezra called Lena. She agreed to meet them at a diner on the edge of town, a quiet place where they could talk without interruption. The diner was nearly empty when they arrived, its retro red booths and jukebox giving it a timeless feel. Lena was already there, sipping coffee, her expression guarded but kind. "I'm sorry if I blindsided you yesterday," she said as Ezra and Elliot slid into the booth. "I didn't know how else to do it." "It's okay," Ezra said, though his stomach churned. "I just need to understand. What else did he tell you?" Lena set down her mug, her eyes distant. It wasn't just one conversation. It was years of small moments, things he'd say when we were alone, working late. He talked about a friend from college, someone he'd been close to. Too close, he said once, then changed the subject. "I think that friendship shaped him, but it also scared him. He married Clara to build the life he thought he was supposed to have." Ezra's throat tightened. "Did Mom know?" "I don't think so," Lena said. "Not explicitly. But she's not naive. She must have sensed something." Elliot reached for Ezra's hand under the table, his thumb tracing soothing circles. "Did he ever talk about Ezra specifically? About how he felt when Ezra came out?" Lena nodded. "Once, after a few drinks, he said he was proud of you, Ezra, for being brave. But he also said he didn't know how to face you, knowing he'd failed you by not being honest himself." The words hit like a punch. Ezra's eyes stung, and he looked away, focusing on the jukebox's flickering lights. Proud. His father had been proud of him. It was everything he'd wanted to hear, and everything he'd never expected. The diner's jukebox hummed a soft country tune, its melody weaving through the tension at the table. Ezra stared at his untouched coffee, Lena's words echoing in his mind. "Proud of you." It was a lifeline, but it also felt like a wound, reopening years of pain he'd tried to bury. Elliot's hand remained steady in his, a quiet anchor in the storm of emotions. "Why now?" Ezra asked, his voice hoarse. "Why tell me this after he's gone?" Lena's expression softened, but her eyes held a flicker of guilt. "I wanted to tell you years ago, but Richard made me promise to stay quiet. He said it would hurt your mother, your brother, the whole family. I respected that, until she trailed off, her gaze dropping to her hands. Until I saw you at the funeral, hiding who you are. It felt wrong to let his silence keep hurting you." Ezra's chest tightened. He wanted to be angry. At Lena, at his father, at the world, but all he felt was a hollow ache. "I don't know what to do with this," he admitted. "It's like I'm mourning him all over again, but for a different reason." Elliot squeezed his hand. "You don't have to figure it out today, but you deserve to know who he was, Ezra. The real him, not the version he showed everyone else." Lena nodded. "There's more. Not much, but I have something of his. Letters he wrote, never sent. I found them in his office after he passed. They're addressed to you." Ezra's breath caught. "Letters." "They're at my hotel," Lena said. "I didn't bring them to the funeral, it didn't feel right. But I can get them for you if you want." Ezra nodded, unable to speak. The idea of his father writing to him, pouring out thoughts he'd never shared in life, was overwhelming. Part of him wanted to read them immediately. Part of him wanted to run from the truth they might hold. After leaving the diner, Ezra and Elliot drove to the Willow Inn, a quaint bed and breakfast on the edge of town. Lena met them in the lobby, a small bundle of envelopes in her hands, tied with a faded ribbon. "These were in a locked drawer," she said, handing them to Ezra. "I don't know what they say, I didn't read them, but I think he wanted you to have them eventually." Ezra's fingers trembled as he took the bundle. The envelopes were yellowed, the ink slightly faded, but his name was clear on each one, written in his father's careful handwriting. He couldn't bring himself to open them, not yet. "Thank you," he managed, his voice thick. Back at Elliot's apartment, Ezra sat on the couch, the letters in his lap. Elliot brewed tea, the clink of mugs a soft counterpoint to the silence. "You don't have to read them now," Elliot said, sitting beside him. "They'll still be there when you're ready." Ezra nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the top envelope, dated 10 years ago. "What if they make it worse?" he whispered. "What if he says something that breaks me?" Elliot's hand found his, warm and steady. "Then we'll put you back together." Together. With a deep breath, Ezra opened the first letter. His father's words spilled across the page, raw and unguarded. "Ezra, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to give it to you. But I need you to know I see you, even when I can't say it." The words blurred as tears filled Ezra's eyes. He read on, each letter a window into a man he'd never truly known. Richard wrote of his college friend, Michael, whose laughter had once been the center of his world. He wrote of the fear that had driven him to marry Clara, to build a life that felt safe but suffocating. And he wrote of Ezra, his pride, his regret, his shame at pushing his son away. By the time Ezra finished, the room was dark, the only light coming from a lamp in the corner. Elliot sat silently, his presence a quiet strength. "He loved you," Elliot said softly. "He just didn't know how to show it." Ezra wiped his eyes, his voice breaking. "I spent so long hating him for hating me, and now I just wish I could talk to him." The next day, Ezra returned to his mother's house, the letters tucked in his bag. Clara was in the kitchen, sorting through sympathy cards, her face drawn. Nathan was there, too, his arms crossed as he leaned against the counter. "Mom, we need to talk," Ezra said, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. "About Dad. About everything." Clara's hands stilled, her eyes meeting his. "What do you mean, honey?" Ezra took a deep breath, pulling out the letters. "Lena gave me these. They're from Dad, addressed to me. They explain some things. Things he never told us." Nathan's jaw tightened. "What things?" Ezra hesitated, then handed Nathan one of the letters. "Read it, please." As Nathan read, his expression shifted from skepticism to shock, then something softer. Grief, maybe, or understanding. Clara took the letter next, her hands trembling. When she finished, tears streamed down her face. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I suspected, but I didn't know." Ezra reached for her hand, his own eyes wet. "He loved us, Mom, in his own way, but he was scared, just like I was." Nathan set the letter down, his voice low. "Why didn't he tell us? Why let us think?" He trailed off, his shoulders sagging. "Because he thought it was the only way," Ezra said. "But it's not. Not anymore." The kitchen was silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock above the sink. Ezra, Clara, and Nathan sat around the table, the letters spread out like a map of their fractured family. The weight of Richard's words hung between them, a truth none of them had been prepared to face. Outside, the Vermont sky was gray, promising rain, but inside, there was a fragile sense of clarity, like the first light after a long night. Clara's voice broke the silence, soft and trembling. "I always knew he was holding something back. There were moments, quiet ones, when he thought I wasn't watching, where he'd look so lost. I thought it was just him. I never imagined this." Ezra reached for her hand, his own steady now. He didn't want to hurt you, Mom. But he hurt himself, too. And me. Nathan stared at the letters, his face unreadable. I looked up to him, he said finally, his voice rough. He was my hero. How do I make sense of this? You don't have to, Ezra said. Not all at once. But we can start by being honest with each other. No more hiding. Clara nodded, wiping her eyes. I should have spoken up sooner. When you came out, Ezra, I wanted to protect you, but I was scared, too. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would keep us together. Ezra's throat tightened. I know, Mom, but silence doesn't keep anyone together. It just builds walls. Nathan shifted in his chair, his eyes meeting Ezra's for the first time in what felt like years. I'm sorry, Easy, for what I said at the funeral. I didn't know how to handle it. Ezra nodded, a weight lifting from his chest. It's okay. We're figuring this out together. That evening, Ezra and Elliot walked through Willow Creek's town square, the air crisp and heavy with the scent of rain. The letters were tucked in Ezra's bag, a tangible piece of his father he hadn't expected to carry. They stopped by the old oak tree near the church, the same one where Lena had first told him the truth. The wooden signpost from the cemetery wasn't there, but Ezra could still see its words in his mind. Love speaks louder than silence. I think I'm ready to let go, Ezra said, his voice steady. Not of Dad, but of the anger, the hurt. Elliot wrapped an arm around him, his warmth a quiet promise. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. Ezra leaned into him, the world softening around them. For the first time, he felt like he could breathe, like the weight of his father's expectations, his family's silence was finally lifting. Richard had been a man of contradictions, loving but flawed, brave but afraid. And Ezra was his son, carrying the same complexities, but with a chance to live differently. A week later, Ezra organized a small gathering at the cemetery, not a second funeral, but a moment to honor the truth. Clara, Nathan, Elliot, and Lena stood by Richard's grave, the autumn leaves swirling around them. Ezra read one of the letters aloud, his voice steady as he shared his father's words of love and regret. There were tears, but also laughter, as they shared stories of Richard, the good, the hard, the human. As the sun set, Ezra placed a small stone on the grave, a Jewish tradition he'd learned from Elliot, a symbol of remembrance. I forgive you, Dad, he whispered, and I hope you found peace. Clara hugged him tightly, her tears soaking his jacket. Nathan clapped a hand on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of their new beginning. Lena smiled, her presence a quiet testament to the courage it took to speak up. And Elliot, always Elliot, stood beside him, his hand in Ezra's, a reminder that love could be loud, unapologetic, and true. They walked away from the grave together, the weight of secrets lifted, replaced by something stronger. Honesty, forgiveness, and the promise of a family rebuilt on truth. Ezra knew there would be hard days ahead, conversations to navigate, wounds to heal. But for the first time he felt whole, not because his father had been perfect, but because he'd finally seen him for who he was. And in that truth Ezra found his own.